Sakagami Sojiro, a high school student, is rushing to school on his first day back. He's seen climbing a slope, exhausted, muttering about how climbing uphill every day is a real ordeal. However, if he continues at this pace, he'll be late. Sojiro was staggering, looking like he was about to collapse from exhaustion when suddenly, a girl on a bicycle sped past him at an astonishing speed. Seeing her, Sojiro secretly admired her agility. But suddenly the girl on the bicycle stopped and called out to him, saying that if he didn't get on the bike right away, they would both be late. Without a moment's hesitation, Sojiro seized the opportunity and hurried with the girl to the school. Upon arrival, Sojiro apologized for bothering her and promised to find a way to repay her. However, the girl didn't seem bothered at all, merely smiling and saying she was as strong as an ox. Sojiro, on the other hand, paid more attention to how short her dress was. His gaze gradually fixed on the scene before him. Despite their efforts, both of them ended up arriving late. When they arrived at school, Sojiro bought her a can of soda as a thank you. Although she felt guilty for being late, the girl accepted the gift. Sojiro just smiled and said it was okay as long as they made it to the second class. While drinking, Sojiro began to wonder who this girl was, questioning whether she was a new student or a third-year student. However, the girl soon revealed her true personality. She unexpectedly asked Sojiro if he had any friends. Of course, Sojiro replied that he did, but that answer caused the girl to start rambling on with a different story. The girl began rambling on about how good she was at fortune-telling and boasting that whenever she told fortunes for her friends, they never came back. This sudden chatter left Sojiro bewildered, but the girl continued. She recalled a story about a friend who had asked her to tell her love compatibility. However, the results showed that her friend and the person she liked were completely incompatible. So the girl suggested a series of ways to improve compatibility, including plastic surgery and similar things. But since that day, her friend never came back. Of course, that's a very natural reaction to hearing such things, and Sojiro immediately pointed that out. However, the girl paid no heed and continued, this time offering to tell Sojiro's fortune as a thank you for the can of soda, making the conversation even more lively. Jokingly, Sojiro said he wanted an older girlfriend, but upon hearing this, the girl's face contorted in an indescribable way, as if she had just heard something terrible. Her expression became so frightening that Sojiro began to panic, hastily asking if he should give up his intention of liking an older girl. In response, the girl took his hand and began to examine it carefully. Meanwhile, Sojiro gradually calmed down. He thought he probably hadn't made too big a mistake. At the same time, his eyes furtively glanced over and noticed that the girl's neckline was quite revealing, but he quickly turned away to avoid being seen. Soon after, the girl released Sojiro's hand and declared that he was destined to be with someone younger and that this would happen in the near future. Anyway, they eventually broke up. The girl told Sojiro to go to the fortune-telling club if he needed anything, and so they both went back to their classroom. In class, the girl walked in and claimed her bicycle had a flat tire on the way to school. Throughout that time, she was preoccupied with her conversation with Sojiro, feeling a little uneasy knowing he wanted an older girlfriend. It turned out that this girl was Mizuki Asuka, a first-year student, and Sojiro's words left a rather deep impression on her. That afternoon, Sojiro decided to stop by the fortune-telling club, but he felt suspicious when he saw only a small piece of paper hanging on the club's door announcing its existence. He wondered if this was an official club. Nevertheless, Sojiro went inside and found Asuka sitting alone eating lunch. Upon entering, Sojiro asked his senpai if he could have lunch with her. However, Asuka had absolutely no memory of who he was. Of course, she hadn't lost her memory. She was just teasing, then said she'd been waiting for him for a long time. Anyway, Sojiro asked if she often ate lunch alone here, and Asuka confirmed, explaining that she didn't have any friends. Hearing this, Sojiro pulled a chair closer, placed it next to her, and sat down. Seeing him sitting so close, Asuka asked why he was sitting so near, but Sojiro simply replied that there was nothing wrong with wanting to have lunch with his precious senpai. Hearing these words, Asuka smiled and called him a playboy. After all, she thought she was cute, so being called that wasn't surprising. Sojiro commented that it was amusing to hear someone say such things about themselves. However, Asuka countered, asking what was wrong with calling herself cute. Eventually, Sojiro relented, admitting she was right because she really was cute. This unexpected compliment made Asuka a little embarrassed, and to hide her shyness, she took out a crystal ball, declaring that it was time to perform her special fortune-telling. But the plan quickly backfired when she accidentally dropped the orb, causing it to shatter on the floor. The room immediately fell into an awkward silence. Unwilling to admit her mistake, Asuka declared that this was Sojiro's destiny. She approached him, and not stopping there, she began to squeeze Sojiro's head tightly with her hands, causing him to scream in pain. While crushing his head, Asuka calmly stated that fate could not be changed. Her fortune-telling was absolute. Nevertheless, Sojiro still tried to shout at her to stop, while also exclaiming that he could feel her breasts. Hearing this, Asuka just laughed and confidently replied, "To die in the arms of a cute girl is every man's dream." After some playful banter, Sojiro suggested they start cleaning up the mess, and Asuka agreed. She began to bend down to pick up the broken pieces of glass, but Sojiro immediately grabbed her hand, stopping her decisively. He said that things like this should be left to the Kuhai, Jr., to handle, and then asked what she would do if she happened to get injured. Seeing Sojiro's masculine appearance, Asuka involuntarily blushed and agreed to let him handle her. However, as soon as Sojiro started picking up the shards of glass, he accidentally cut his hand and blood started to seep out. Asuka quickly brought over a bandage, seemingly to help him bandage his wound. But it turned out her real intention was to use Sojiro's blood as a seal to complete his club membership application. Naturally, Sojiro panicked and hastily asked if this was really her plan. Hearing this question, Asuka seemed a little disappointed and asked if Sojiro hated these kinds of clubs. Not wanting to see her upset, Sojiro immediately denied it, insisting that it wasn't true. Immediately, Asuka happily pressed his blood-stained finger onto the application form, officially completing the membership process. Not only that, she even licked Sojiro's wound. This left him speechless and stunned. Immediately afterward, Asuka hurriedly ran off to submit her application to join the club, leaving Sojiro standing there, bewildered and wondering if he would be alright joining a club like this. Meanwhile, Asuka smiled brightly, extremely pleased with her success in persuading Sojiro to join. But of course, her application to join, using her blood mark, was flatly rejected by the club's advisor. The next morning, Sojiro was getting ready for school while watching the news. While getting dressed, he suddenly remembered that he still didn't know Asuka's name. Just then, his younger sister burst into the room, yelling because Sojiro hadn't put his dirty clothes away properly. The two began arguing loudly while the daily horoscope program was airing on the TV screen. According to astrology, Sagittarius, Sojiro's zodiac sign, will have good luck today if they carry an umbrella. This umbrella might even help them get closer to the person they're thinking about. Anyway, after arriving at school and reuniting with his senpai, Sojiro decided to bring up the topic of her name. He wanted to know more about this mysterious girl. However, Asuka started joking, asking if Sojiro wanted to know her shoe size. Sojiro, however, was more interested in the size of something else. Suddenly, he noticed that Asuka's sandals were the exact same color as the kind first-year students usually wear. Hearing this, Asuka panicked, dropping the box she was packing. Not only that, she also tried to deflect the conversation for a while by saying random things. However, Sojiro persisted in his questioning. The fact that someone supposedly a third-year student was wearing first-year student sandals made him wonder. Cornered, Asuka approached Sojiro and cleverly fabricated a story that she had failed a year in high school, and the sandals worn by the fourth-year and first-year students are the same color. Hearing this, Sojiro immediately believed her, profusely apologizing for asking such a rude question. He even told himself that this was the reason Asuka had no friends, at least in his opinion. Asuka readily agreed, arguing that being held back a year meant she couldn't make friends, and that was understandable. However, Sojiro once again brought up the topic of Asuka's name, but she refused to say anything about herself. Not my name or race. Instead, she deflected the topic by urging Sojiro to join the club and uttered a cryptic remark. That's what's called advance warning. Hearing this, Sojiro replied that he hadn't joined the club yet, especially since the news said it would be sunny today. As a result, Asuka told him to wait for her at the shoe rack after school, and Sojiro complied. When they met, he discovered it was raining again. Asuka then said that she had an umbrella that they could both share. Then the two of them started walking towards the bus stop together. Suddenly finding himself in such a close situation with the beautiful girl in such a confined space, Sojiro began to have strange thoughts and tried to change the atmosphere. He remembered Asuka often riding her bike to school and hesitantly asked her about it. But this only made Asuka burst into laughter and mock his awkwardness. They both arrived at the bus station. Asuka helped Sojiro down and then started walking away. As she walked away, she told Sojiro not to catch a cold. This made Sojiro feel out of place as a man. But what could she do? Meanwhile, Asuka was pondering why she had gone to such lengths to conceal her lie. How could Sojiro have believed that story in the first place? However, in her mind, she felt powerless because Sojiro had said he preferred older girls. Nevertheless, she had the opportunity to spend the whole day with him, having lunch and sharing an umbrella. So she decided to continue being his senpai for now. One day at school, Sojiro's friend Ubayashi declared that he could predict what kind of person Sojiro would be. He then gave Sojiro a book and asked him which of the girls on the page he liked. As a result, Sojiro chose girl number C, who was wearing a bikini and showing off her striking curves. After considering his friend's choice, Obayashi predicted that Sojiro preferred girls with large breasts. While they were talking about this, Asuka walked by and Sojiro pulled his shirt tighter. Seeing the girl, Obayashi asked if she was a friend of Sojiro, and Sojiro explained that she was their senpai. So, Sojiro introduced the two to each other, and Obayashi tried to make a good impression on her. However, it seems Asuka is trying to avoid him, choosing to hide behind Sojiro. This made Obayashi a little upset, and he asked if she suspected him. To make a better impression, Obayashi took out some candy and tried to offer it to her, but she immediately refused. This led the two boys to tease her, assuming those were her first rejections. But then, Obayashi came up with a brilliant idea. He declared that he would reveal a secret about Sojiro, and in return, she needed to befriend him. This immediately caught Asuka's attention. So, Obayashi told Asuka the secret he had just learned, that Sojiro liked girls with large breasts. This surprised Asuka, and she confirmed it with Sojiro himself. Of course, Sojiro readily admitted it. So, Asuka started talking about her breasts and admitted that they were quite large. Sojiro declared that he also liked her mommy milkers. Hearing this, Asuka praised Obayashi as a wonderful person. While they were chatting, Sojiro told his friend that Asuka was a fortune teller and was often right about these matters. However, at this point, he recalled that all of her fortune-telling sessions had involved things that were inappropriate. Nevertheless, Asuka decided to put on a skill demonstration for Obayashi, and she told him to hold out his hand. Hearing this, Sojiro felt conflicted and was about to intervene, but Asuka quickly saw what she wanted and declared that Obayashi didn't have long to live. She said he should carve his own path to survival with a hammer and chisel or something. This made Sojiro laugh while Obayashi was shocked by the news of his impending death. When the laughter subsided, Asuka asked Sojiro what he was saying when he tried to interrupt her while she was doing her fortune-telling. Sojiro, feeling embarrassed and not wanting Asuka to hold other people's hands inappropriately, tried to evade the question but without success. While trying to justify himself, he inadvertently started talking about how Asuka didn't usually expose her breasts. Of course, as soon as he said it, Sojiro realized he was in an awkward situation. However, to his surprise, Asuka leaned closer and whispered in his ear, saying that she only did that when she was alone in the club room with Sojiro, of course. They both felt embarrassed. But then the bell rang and they separated. As she left, Asuka told Sojiro to stop by the clubroom later. Meanwhile, Obayashi remained confused, unsure how to cope with his impending departure. However, it turned out that Asuka wasn't talking about Obayashi's life, but about his score. He's gonna die because Obayashi forgot to finish his English assignment, which was due today. A few hours later, Sojiro arrived at the clubroom and found Asuka teaching him about palmistry. She pointed to his lifeline and revealed that it meant Sojiro was alive and well. Of course, this information was useless to Sojiro as he already knew he was alive. He also realized that Asuka's predictions were inconsistent. While she continued to talk about his palm lines and how they indicated he had a heart, Sojiro wanted to try reading Asuka's palm and noticed she had many lines indicating a sixth sense. Hearing this, Asuka was surprised that Sojiro knew so much about palmistry, but he explained that he was just looking up the information. However, he began boasting about his abilities and claimed he would become a better fortune teller than Asuka in the future. This displeased Asuka, and she decided to play a simple betting game to see who was actually better. That evening, at the Sakagami house, Rin, Sojiro's younger sister, returned home late. When she entered the house, she saw a pile of bread on the table and asked her mother what had happened. Sojiro's mother explained that Sojiro himself had bought all the bread. Furthermore, he allowed Rin and her mother to take as much as they wanted. So last night turned into day. The next morning, Sojiro was astonished to find that his pile of bread was gone. Hearing her brother's cry, Rin woke up and was questioned about where the bread had gone. However, she tried to deny any involvement, and she began to speak frankly, asking why Sojiro was so interested in bread. Sojiro explained that the reason he was interested in bread was because of Asuka's prophecy. It turned out they had played a fortune-telling game yesterday, and Asuka had suggested they bet on something that would happen that day. The loser will have to do whatever the winner asks. In addition, Asuka gave Sojiro the right to decide what they would bet on. Sojiro happily agreed. He announced that they would bet on what dish he would bring to school the next day, emphasizing that he usually made it himself. Asuka immediately agreed and declared that her victory was certain. She said Sojiro would bring lunch tomorrow, and so he bought a lot of bread yesterday to win the bet. Seeing her brother worried, Rin tried to comfort him and told Sojiro not to worry, as they could prepare a meal. However, that only made Asuka prove herself even better. While Sojiro was upset about it, Rin tried to calm him down, suggesting he take a bath when he got home that evening. But seeing how thoughtfully Rin treated him, Sojiro realized that she was the one who had taken the bread. However, seeing that she felt remorse, Sojiro decided to forgive Rin and patted her on the head. However, she only called him an eccentric for that action. and so Asuka won the bet. At school, she announced that Sojiro could no longer be complacent because she was better than him at fortune-telling. Now it's time to carry out the punishment. But all Asuka wanted was for Sojiro to officially join the club, and he really didn't mind at all. Furthermore, she asked Sojiro what he planned to make her do if he won. And Sojiro revealed that he only wanted to know his senpai's real name. As a result, she placed his head on her chest and said that her name was Mizuki Asuka. However, when Sojiro tried to call her Mizuki, she asked him to call her Asuka. This created a small argument. But in the end, Asuka accepted defeat and left. It was all part of Sojiro's plan. He enjoyed watching her blush. And her embarrassed expression made him feel a little excited too. He eventually fell off the chair and got a nosebleed. After filling out the application form, Sojiro went to the teacher's room to submit it. There he was called upon by Tsukumi-sensei, the club's advisor. He turned out to be a rather special character. After being called, she learned that Sojiro had come to join the club, and she led him outside to talk. However, once they went outside, Tsukimi began to reveal her true personality. She asked why Sojiro wanted to join the club. This implies that it must be because of Asuka and her enormous melons in her head. She argued that no normal student would want to join a club like that unless they had ulterior motives. Sojiro responded by saying that he himself found all this numerology stuff annoying. But now he feels very happy at the club. In fact, he even said that he would join the club even if Asuka were a boy. Hearing this answer, Tsukimi thought for a moment and finally accepted his application. She went back to the teacher's room, but before leaving, she told him not to open the locker at the back of the club room. Sojiro returned to the club room, but he was bewildered to see Asuka wildly swinging her wooden sword like a madwoman. When she recognized him, she asked for his help, saying a butterfly had gotten too close. However, when Asuka explained that the butterfly had come from the cabinet mentioned earlier, the insect flew even closer. Seeing this, Asuka was clearly frightened and rushed to hug Sojiro. But this situation was too much for Sojiro, because Asuka was hugging him in an unusual position, allowing him to feel her softness. Even so, Asuka was paralyzed with fear, declaring that the butterfly would kill her. Although Sojiro didn't entirely dislike the situation, he understood that it could turn out in a negative way. As the butterfly flew closer, Sojiro managed to grab its wings just in time, and he released the butterfly into the world. Seeing his action, Asuka seemed quite surprised. Finally, the atmosphere of fear dissipated. Sojiro asked why Asuka was so afraid of insects, but she just said that she wasn't really afraid of them. In fact, she even chatted with them on her days off. Suddenly, Tsukimi appeared from behind them, placed his hand on Asuka's head, and mysteriously asked if she was messing around with the forbidden cabinet that he had told her not to open. Of course, Asuka tried to make up an excuse to get out of the situation, but Tsukimi noticed the wooden swords which had been stored in the cupboard. She asked the students to rearrange the chairs and desks, and they started to follow suit. But soon after, another butterfly appeared out of nowhere. Seeing this, Asuka threw the chair in her hand into the air and tried to avoid the insect. This caused her to trip and fall. Seeing this, Sojiro rushed in to catch her and managed to grab her just as she was about to fall. He joked that Asuka's conversation with the butterfly must not have been pleasant. His masculinity attracted Asuka, and she quickly told him to be quiet and asked him to let go of her. However, Tsukimi interrupted, breaking the cute moment and asking if any of them had been bitten. Ironically, Sojiro actually saw the bite mark. Both Tsukimi and Asuka ran away from him with panicked expressions on their faces. Tsukimi said there was nothing to worry about, and everything would be fine if he got some sleep, perhaps. These ominous words terrified Sojiro, but then Asuka tried to comfort him, saying he looked really cool just now and thanking him. That was a death omen if I'd ever seen one. However, they reassured him that he wouldn't die, and it all just made Sojiro develop a fear of insects. After being bedridden for 2 days, one morning Sojiro received a news report that his day would be full of bad luck. Although there was nothing he could do to avoid it, he still went to school as usual. However, as soon as he stepped out of the house, bad luck began to strike. He immediately tripped and fell face down on the ground. Not only that, a box of juice even fell and hit him on the head right in front of his house, and a crow landed on his head. Nevertheless, he went to school and luckily met Asuka. He told her about his terrible day. However, Asuka was more concerned about how his outfit looked. Seeing this, she began to adjust him, straightening his shirt and jacket. Meanwhile, Sojiro continued talking about his day, but then he realized his tie was missing. It turned out Asuka had taken the tie and was wearing it. But the story didn't end there. After adjusting Sojiro's clothes, Asuka went on to fix his hair. While she was doing so, Sojiro asked her if her hair color was natural. However, Asuka avoided the question until she finished her work. Then she gave Sojiro a mirror to look at himself, and surprisingly, she had created a hairstyle that resembled poop. This made Asuka burst out laughing, while Sojiro didn't find it amusing at all. Just then, a ball flew into the classroom and hit Sojiro on the head. The players, after running back to retrieve the ball, apologized for their carelessness and asked if anyone was injured. However, upon seeing Sojiro's poop hairstyle, they began to tease him, making Sojiro extremely angry. Seeing this situation, Asuka realized that a simple hairstyle like that wasn't enough, and she came up with an idea. She started making over Sojiro again, this time transforming him into a club hostess. With his cooler appearance, Sojiro began acting like a typical host, trying to keep the atmosphere cheerful and make a good impression on Asuka. But soon after, Asuka felt she'd had enough and reverted to her normal, somewhat dull self. Seeing this, Sojiro asked if he could do a makeover for Asuka this time, and she agreed. Sojiro stood up, adjusted Asuka's hair, giving her a cooler hairstyle. After he finished, he took a picture of his artwork. Seeing this, Asuka suggested they take a picture together to commemorate the day, and they stood close together. At this moment, Asuka received a prediction. She saw someone step on the ball and fall, which made her feel a little embarrassed for some reason. Nevertheless, they took the photo and began cleaning up the club room. As he prepared to go out, Sojiro remarked that his feeling of bad luck had dissipated. Hearing this, Asuka suggested that perhaps only she could help him. Sojiro suddenly felt embarrassed and asked if this was a declaration of love from her. However, it turned out that Asuka's prophecy had actually come true. Suddenly, Sojiro stepped on a ball and began to fall. But this time, instead of falling face down on the ground, he fell into Asuka's ample breasts. Nevertheless, they shared an awkward moment. In her heart, Asuka knew this would happen and could have easily avoided it. But perhaps it was unavoidable since her prophecies always come true. Anyway, she's gradually becoming a yandere. However, I have no complaints. After a few days, Asuka decided to show Sojiro her school swimsuit and ask him what he thought of it. Of course, Sojiro, as a man, could only think of one thing. It was huge. Asuka agreed with that thought, and she said that the swimsuit was her mother's old one and quite big for her. Hearing this, Sojiro, with his dark mind, felt confused, not understanding what his mother's old one meant, and he asked if they were fake. The two of them decided to go to a nearby shopping mall. On the way, Sojiro realized they were talking about Asuka's swimsuit, not her breasts. When they went into the swimsuit shop, Asuka said she had to be careful not to expose her breasts and introduce herself to her classmates. Nevertheless, they went into the store and Asuka started changing clothes. Meanwhile, Sojiro stood outside the locker room. He eagerly awaited what was to come. A little later, Asuka came out in her first swimsuit, a black bikini, and asked Sojiro what she thought of it. The only word that came to Sojiro's mind was sexy. Actually, that was true, but perhaps he could have expressed it a little more subtly. As a result, Asuka felt embarrassed and changed into a different swimsuit. However, that didn't change Sojiro's answer at all. After about the 3rd or 30th outfit, Asuka started to feel confused and slightly annoyed, causing Sojiro to apologize for taking so long. This time, he sincerely said that all the outfits suited her well and that she looked adorable. These words were enough to calm Asuka down. Furthermore, she decided to buy all the swimsuits she tried on. Sojiro, meanwhile, remembered that calling her cute would make his senpai very happy. So the shopping was over and they left. But soon after, Sojiro asked her why she bought a regular swimsuit, since her school swimsuit was the real problem. At this point, Asuka began to remember that she had never been to the beach in her life. She simply didn't have anyone to go with. But now she has Sojiro, and she felt that summer seemed to become more enjoyable. With that in mind, she asked him if he would like to accompany her a little longer, and he happily agreed. As a result, they both strolled around the shopping mall, enjoying themselves through food and shopping. They also took some memorable photos, and soon, their time together came to an end. Asuka remarked that today was a lot of fun, and thanked Sojiro for being with her. Sojiro, meanwhile, was still stunned, unable to believe that everything had felt so much like a date. To him, they looked like a couple who had been dating for 3 months. However, Asuka didn't see any problem with that. Even so, Sojiro had to go home early because he had a cooking duty today, but Asuka didn't want him to leave so quickly. So she started making up excuses, saying her hands were tired from carrying bags all day. However, Sojiro wasn't easily fooled, so she switched tactics, saying her house was being infested with cockroaches and asking Sojiro to come and help her get rid of them. Hearing this, Sojiro realized that she only wanted to invite him home, but to him, that wasn't a good idea. This could lead to all sorts of trouble, but he pretended not to understand. Asuka asked Sojiro what was wrong with inviting him to her house. After a moment of hesitation, Sojiro finally accepted her invitation, and this made Asuka look at him with a seductive gaze. Sojiro couldn't help but notice her breasts, but he immediately slapped himself, ordering himself to stop having dirty thoughts and focus on positive ones. At that moment, Rin received a call from her brother, informing her that he would be home late. In the Sakagami family, Sojiro's mother trusted her son and hoped that he wouldn't do anything wrong, especially now that he was in high school. Meanwhile, Sojiro was sitting alone in the living room of Asuka's apartment. He sat silently, observing the apartment, noticing that it looked almost brand new. Initially, he only intended to bring Asuka's bag inside and then leave, but now he decided to put the food in the refrigerator before leaving. When Sojiro opened the refrigerator, he found it strangely empty, but he didn't pay too much attention to this. He was putting in the newly bought food, probably because Asuka had run out of food. We know that Asuka lives alone. Throughout the journey to her apartment, Asuka began boasting about how she had been trying to live independently. This prompted Sojiro to say that it must be exhausting to do all the housework alone, such as cooking and other chores. However, Asuka didn't consider it a big deal, proudly stating that she cooked lavish meals for herself every day. Although Sojiro knew she was exaggerating, he didn't say anything further. Finally, they arrived at her apartment, and Asuka invited Sojiro in, telling him to make himself at home while she went to take a shower to freshen up. In the room, Sojiro sat there thinking about his conversation. Then suddenly Asuka walked into the room wearing only a towel. This caused Sojiro to turn away to avoid looking. He began to panic when he saw a nearly naked girl standing right in front of him, but Asuka just told him to calm down. She said she'd forgotten her clothes and was just going into the room to get them. When she found her clothes, Sojiro, unable to control himself, secretly glanced at her, and Sojiro immediately screamed like a girl when he saw Asuka with her back turned, exposing her butt. However, he decided not to let himself be distracted and instead started doing something useful. While Asuka was changing clothes, Sojiro decided to cook. Seeing this, Asuka remarked that he could be really decisive sometimes, then said that he must be trying to show off. While Sojiro was cooking, Asuka behaved like a little child. She was always curious, asking him what he was cooking and constantly bothering him. Sojiro patted her on the head, pretending to be her father. However, this only angered Asuka further. She wants to try cutting tofu, but Sojiro noticed that her knife-handling skills were quite dangerous, fearing she might cut her hand. Sojiro decided to teach Asuka how to hold a knife properly, but it all led to a situation where they were standing too close together. Once again, Asuka mocked him, and Sojiro quickly apologized, saying that he was only trying to help her. Before long, the rice was cooked, and they both set the table and began to enjoy their meal. When Asuka took her first bite, she immediately praised Sojiro's cooking, saying it was delicious, and her expression showed that she was truly saying it from the heart. After the meal, Sojiro decided to go home, as he felt he had stayed too long. However, Asuka disagreed and suggested he stay overnight. Sojiro firmly refused. Hearing this, Asuka remembered that she didn't have an umbrella to lend Sojiro, but he didn't understand why he needed one. However, as soon as Sojiro opened the door, he discovered it was raining heavily outside. Outside, Asuka, with an expression that was both terrifying and alluring, asserted that Sojiro couldn't possibly be going home in this kind of rain tonight. So Sojiro had no choice but to close the door, shaking his head regretfully and wondering what would happen to him. Despite his discomfort, he went inside, feeling uneasy about being in this apartment with an older woman who seemed rather provocative. He asked if she could lend him her umbrella, but Asuka replied that even an umbrella wouldn't be able to withstand such heavy rain for long. Sojiro suggested calling his father to pick him up, but Asuka explained that his father wouldn't be coming home from work today. This left Sojiro feeling helpless, and he came up with a final plan. He would run back without getting wet. However, Asuka replied that this was the first time in a long time she had had dinner with someone else, and she looked at Sojiro with a lonely gaze. She asked if he could stay with her a little longer, and unable to refuse her request, Sojiro finally agreed. After that, they watched a movie together. But instead of sitting next to Sojiro, Asuka sat right on his lap. This situation made Sojiro wonder, does this girl like me? But he immediately dismissed the thought, knowing full well Asuka's eccentric personality and lack of personal space. Therefore, he explained that since they were a man and a woman of marriageable age, they should maintain a certain physical distance from each other. However, Asuka, being an innocent girl, thought he was talking about the plot of the movie. She commented on how the female protagonist, despite having a boyfriend, preferred to rely on others for comfort. She also called women who throw themselves at men without thinking quite bad, making Sojiro wonder if she'd looked in the mirror recently. However, Asuka simply brushed it off and explained that a cute girl was looking back at her in the mirror. Each time Asuka did that, Sojiro understood even more clearly how naive she was. However, observing her actions, he once again wondered if Asuka truly liked him. Suddenly, she started talking about how nice it was to spend time like this with someone. The atmosphere suddenly became tense, and Sojiro felt an urge to hug his senpai. He almost did it, but in the end, he resisted the temptation. Suddenly, Asuka said that she had caught him, and immediately a thunderstorm came. Lightning struck, and the power went out. Taking advantage of the situation, Asuka hugged Sojiro tightly, saying that she was scared. But of course, this is a very dangerous situation for many reasons that anyone can imagine. Sojiro immediately tried to push her away, but Asuka refused to let go, declaring that he was terrified. That wasn't actually the case, but Sojiro tried to confront her, insisting that she knew this would happen. However, Asuka maintained that no matter what, she couldn't control her fear. As they struggled and argued, the situation unexpectedly led to both of them tripping over each other, and falling on top of each other in the pitch-black darkness. This created a rather awkward situation. Sojiro, meanwhile, asked Asuka how far into the future she could actually see, and she replied that she knew everything, although she tries to avoid looking too much into her own future. She only knew that the lights would go out. Sojiro kept asking why she had gone so far for him, and Asuka simply replied that she would do what she felt was right. So Sojiro asked her what she would do if he admitted that he was having strange thoughts about her. Hearing this, Asuka's face flushed bright red, feeling confused and embarrassed. She turned to ask him what he wanted to do. While Sojiro was pondering this question, the lights suddenly came back on, and now they both realize Asuka is in an extremely dangerous situation. But in that moment, Sojiro awakened his alpha within him and fled the situation despite the heavy rain. The next day, Sojiro still felt sluggish all day. After class ended, Ubayashi approached him, informed him that everyone had gone home, and reminded him to go to the club room. Hearing this, Sojiro walked away without saying a word, which worried Ubayashi. On the other hand, Sojiro was still unsure whether Asuka truly liked him. The fact remained that she had invited him to her house and engaged in such behavior. This means Asuka had planned to have sex with him last night, and if they actually did, they probably graduated from their teenage years last night. Although such things aren't uncommon in today's society, Sojiro is a traditionalist. He's not ready for that. Finally, he walked into the club room and Asuka immediately rushed towards him. However, after seeing Sojiro, she let him go and explained that she thought he was a customer. However, she said she had forgotten something at his house last night and started taking off her coat. But when he saw her undress, Sojiro screamed, recalling the events of the previous day. Although he ran away last time, he was still a man and therefore unsure if he could do the same if he were in that situation again. Seeing that he seemed panicked, Asuka apologized for yesterday, saying that she had gone too far and taken advantage of Sojiro's kindness. However, she insisted that it was necessary. Hearing this, Sojiro realized that it was his own emotions that were confused and tried to explain this to his senpai. However, Asuka simply told Sojiro to stay in the locker for today and pushed him inside. This confused Sojiro. Just a moment ago, she had been so serious, but now she had completely changed. But not long after, someone came to the club room. That person was Ubayashi. The man said he heard that this club could be used for seeking advice. Ubayashi began talking about Sojiro's strange behavior today, and he also hinted that he knew Asuka's secret. The truth is, she's actually younger than both of them. In addition, he stated that although Sojiro has some weaknesses, but he still considered him a friend and wouldn't forgive Asuka if she had done anything to make Sojiro behave that way. Hearing that, Asuka burst out laughing, and she commented that Sojiro was very lucky to have such a good friend. However, she told Ubayashi not to worry, even though she might sometimes be thoughtless with Sojiro. But he was still a member of her club, and therefore she wouldn't do anything to deceive or hurt him. Ubayashi decided to trust her and prepared to leave. As Ubayashi left, Asuka revealed a little more about the future, informing him that, like Sojiro, his fate would also be intertwined with someone younger than himself. Hearing this, Ubayashi left, and Sojiro stepped out of the locker. Asuka once again told him how lucky he was to have such a wonderful friend. Sojiro replied that he didn't deserve a friend like that. Then Sojiro sat down and asked Asuka if they had ever met before. He also asked if she liked him. In response to his question, Asuka replied cryptically, saying that, as she had told him before, Sojiro's fate is intertwined with that of someone younger. Hearing this, Sojiro decided to tell Asuka all the weaknesses in her behavior towards the opposite sex. He also expressed how much he enjoyed the club's activities and the time he spent with her. Finally, he patted her head gently, making her happy. Meanwhile, in his heart, Sojiro said to himself, even though Asuka genuinely liked him, he couldn't accept all those feelings immediately. Although Sojiro really wanted to, he couldn't. Not only that, he also wanted to protect their current relationship. Therefore, if he truly falls for Asuka, he plans to tell her clearly. However, if those were just figments of his imagination, it would be the biggest joke of the century. Suddenly, Sojiro found himself wondering about something, and then realized that he had only heard fragmented pieces of the story. But Asuka said it was a secret. This made Sojiro feel a little heavy-hearted. Conversely, during a class in Rin's class, students were being paired up for an art class. The pairs had to draw portraits of each other, and at the end of the class, everyone had to submit their work. After class ended, Rin's friends, Nagi and Mo, came over to chat with them. Unexpectedly, Asuka, who was also in the same class as them, secretly approached Rin from behind and asked her to pair up with her. Her sudden appearance startled Rin, while Nagi seemed to already know Asuka. It turns out Nagi is a friend of Uta, the girl who received the prophecy from Asuka. Before long, Rin was no longer unfamiliar with the situation, and she told Asuka to get off her. Seeing this, Mo asked if the two knew each other, but Rin denied it. However, Asuka whispered in Rin's ear about Sojiro and how well she knew him. This piqued Rin's curiosity, and she eventually decided to pair up with Asuka. She told her friends to leave, and the two of them started working on their assignment. While doing their homework, Rin asked Asuka how she knew her brother and what their relationship was like, but Asuka only said that Sojiro had helped her with some things. In addition, Asuka seemed more concerned about what kind of older brother Sojiro was, while Rin simply replied that he was okay. Asuka tried to pry further, mentioning that Sojiro was a skilled chef. This prompted Rin to explain that they usually share household chores and cooking is just his part of the job. Then, Asuka asked Rin what her job was, but Rin looked confused, not understanding when they had started calling each other by their first names. Asuka started teasing, telling her she could call her One-chan, but this only angered Rin. She asked Asuka to be quiet and sit down to draw. However, Asuka revealed that she had finished the portrait of Rin and showed it to her. When Rin looked at the painting, she was very surprised because it was really beautiful, but something seems off about it. Not only is Rin wearing an apron instead of her uniform, but the mole on her shoulder is also clearly drawn on. This left Rin feeling confused and embarrassed, wondering how Asuka knew about her mole. She argued that the painting was wrong for several reasons, especially because it was drawn for a classroom. Hearing this, Asuka decided to throw it away, as the painting was no longer of any value. But this made Rin feel a little sad. She muttered that Asuka might have given the painting to her instead of throwing it away. Hearing these words, Asuka continued to tease Rin, telling her not to be shy in front of her older sister. She also hugged Rin, which made Rin uncomfortable, but not for the reason you might think. Actually, Rin felt uncomfortable because of Asuka's large breasts. In a fit of rage, she accidentally squeezed one of Asuka's body parts. She realized that her brother must have been charmed by Asuka's mom-like appearance. However, Asuka insisted that there was nothing to worry about. Sojiro always knew his limits, and he was always kind. At this point, Rin began staring at Asuka's hand, where there was a burn scar. This reminded her of her childhood when she used to try to cook for her family. When their mother was always busy with work and housework, Rin wanted to help for the first time. However, that caused her to burn her hand. Sojiro, who was also a child at the time, took her to the hospital and comforted her. Since then, Sojiro has always taken on the cooking duties as a way to protect his younger sister. Anyway, Asuka only told Rin to keep her true identity a secret from Sojiro, and soon the lesson was over. After Asuka left, Mo and Nagi came to ask Rin how her class went, but she only called Asuka a strange girl, although he wasn't a bad person in her eyes. That evening, Sojiro returned home. Rin inadvertently asked him if he knew Mizuki, but immediately remembered her promise to keep Asuka's identity a secret. However, she only told her brother to stay away from women with large breasts. As for Sojiro, he explained to Rin that if he were to have a girlfriend, he would prefer someone with a good relationship. One day, Asuka decided to cosplay as Kokiri-san, a Japanese fox goddess, and she borrowed this cosplay outfit from club advisor Suzumi, hoping someone would try it on with her. Sojiro immediately refused, even though Asuka glanced at him. He stubbornly maintained his stance that he wasn't good at scary things. However, Asuka didn't accept this answer, so when no one else was playing with him, she started threatening Sojiro, saying he would have to take off her cosplay costume if he didn't join. Hearing this, Sojiro had no choice but to agree to avoid legal trouble. The two quickly began the game. They recited the song aloud and summoned Kokiri-san. When they did so, the coin they used as a signal began to move. This frightened Sojiro, while Asuka calmly stated that it was just a low-level spirit. However, she suggested he try asking the spirit a few questions. So Sojiro asked the most important question, the one everyone wanted to know. What did Asuka eat last night? And sure enough, the coin started moving, forming the words supplementary food. Because as we all know, Asuka is terrible at cooking. Hearing this, Asuka became angry and decided to take revenge, so she sought to humiliate Sojiro. She asked the spirit about Sojiro's first love, and as a result, the name Rie appeared. Asuka tried to use this to tease Sojiro, but he explained that Rie was his kindergarten teacher. He also asked if she wanted to know more about her. However, Asuka refused, although Sojiro didn't believe her. So he went on to ask the spirit if Asuka liked teacher Rie, but the spirit refused, shattering all of Sojiro's hopes. Asuka revealed that she didn't really care about what had happened in the past. They both finished asking the questions they wanted to ask, and then Asuka decided to ask one last question. How do we get rid of the Kokursen? Hearing this, Sojiro lost his temper and declared that she should stop before they were cursed. But it seems it's already too late. Suddenly they felt a shock spreading through their bodies. Although Asuka said it might be static electricity, Sojiro was bewildered and terrified, accepting that he would die. Of course, Asuka wasn't really scared and just told him to calm down, saying that phenomena like this only happen when people believe they are real. But as soon as she noticed the board breaking right in front of her, a shiver ran down her spine and she realized they had made a mistake. Sojiro asked what would happen if he were cursed, and Asuka explained that, of course the cursed person will die. Tsukumi will be very angry with them for tearing the board. Suddenly, a loud noise erupted from the club room door, startling both of them. But in the blink of an eye, the door was blown off its hinges. From the other side, Tsukimi walked in and asked what they were doing. She hinted that they were definitely up to something bad. Seeing her arrive, Asuka breathed a sigh of relief. He rushed over and hugged her tightly. Meanwhile, Sojiro fainted from fear. Seeing him fall to the ground, Asuka decided to put a pillow on his lap to help him regain consciousness. At that moment, she revealed that she had lied about something while playing the game. She admitted that she wasn't uninterested in Rie. Although she doesn't care about the past, this is a unique exception. Suddenly, she had a good idea and asked Tsukimi if she had a marker pen. Coincidentally, Tsukimi had one in her back pocket and gave it to Asuka. With a pen, Asuka began drawing on Sojiro's face until Tsukimi wanted to speak. However, Asuka refused, saying that she had already assigned him to her younger sister. Asuka wrote her name on Sojiro's face as if marking her territory. One day, Sojiro asked Asuka if she had any friends, and her answer was a clear no. Conversely, Sojiro continued to ask why, suggesting that the reason might be because her face was rather frightening. Asuka, whose only redeeming quality was her appearance, was angered by this comment. But Sojiro explained that when a cute girl looks at someone with a serious face, she looks scary. So he advised her to try changing her expression a little. However, Asuka insisted that it wasn't her fault because she was born beautiful. That's the misery of success, Sojiro thought to himself. Even so, if Asuka didn't mind not having friends, Sojiro decided not to pressure her further. However, Asuka still wants to have friends. Meanwhile, Sojiro had a plan of action in mind. He thought that the reason Asuka felt so strangely distant from others might be because she had no one to confide in, or perhaps because she didn't have any friends. If so, she just needed to make friends, and her eccentric personality would improve somewhat. Unexpectedly, Asuka asked what she needed to do to change her expression. Sojiro suggested she try smiling more. She did, but if it could even be called a smile, it looked rather creepy. Seeing that expression, Sojiro was almost frozen with fear, and begged her never to make such a strange face again. However, Asuka came up with a bold idea. Since she couldn't control her facial expressions, perhaps Sojiro could do it for her. Although initially hesitant, Sojiro agreed and tried to make her smile more naturally. However, the results were disastrous, so Sojiro began roughly shaping her face, telling her she needed at least something for him to work with. Seeing this, Asuka burst out laughing. Asuka started to laugh, saying that her face looked natural like that, and then the wonderful moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The radiant smile on her face deeply moved Sojiro. He exclaimed that if she could intentionally smile like that, she would become a living goddess. However, Asuka didn't really want that. She wanted friends, not adoration. Seeing Sojiro's expression, Asuka asked if he liked her smile. But for Sojiro, that didn't matter much. He thought this was just an exercise for Asuka to make friends. Asuka said that as long as she could get along with someone who loved her very much, she thought everything would be fine. Asuka asked Sojiro which version of her he liked best, and Sojiro said he liked her current version. This made Asuka blush. Asuka then declared that she would try to be less scary from now on. Sojiro encouraged her positively, motivating her on her journey of meeting and making friends. Later that day, Asuka was in class when Mo unexpectedly approached her. Mo had come to collect her Japanese history notebook, and Asuka gave her hers. Recalling her conversation with Sojiro, Asuka tried to make a good impression by smiling at Mo and thanking her for her efforts. Asuka's sudden change in attitude made Mo's heart skip a beat, and she hurriedly left in confusion. Meanwhile, Asuka thought her plan had failed, completely unaware that she had just scored a perfect target. On the other side of the classroom, a girl with short hair, seemingly quiet and gloomy, was staring at Asuka, her hands clutching her dress. One day, Sojiro and Yubayashi were doing cleaning duty together. After sweeping the area, Sojiro went to take out the trash, shouting to remind Yubayashi to change the trash bag. While Sojiro was taking trash to the processing area, he came across a lonely-looking girl standing there. Initially, Sojiro intended to ignore the girl and return to class. But when he heard her sobbing, he felt uncomfortable leaving her alone. So he approached her, offered her his handkerchief, and asked if she was all right. He said that if she felt unwell, he could take her to the infirmary. This girl turned out to be the same one who had appeared earlier, the one we saw staring at Asuka. When she saw a stranger unexpectedly approach, she immediately asked if he was flirting with her, but clearly that wasn't the case. Nevertheless, Sojiro sat down beside her, trying to offer her some comfort. During the conversation, the girl remarked that it was quite unusual for a guy to use a handkerchief like that. However, Sojiro disagreed. He explained that in his case, he had a rather troublesome senpai who frequently got into dangerous situations, so carrying a handkerchief was necessary. Unexpectedly, the girl recognized the image of Namazu, a fortune-telling mascot that had appeared on the news, on Sojiro's handkerchief. But immediately, she expressed her aversion to fortune-telling. She claimed that fortune-tellers were nothing but lowlifes who exploited people's fears and uttered baseless sweet words. Her harsh words made Sojiro wonder if she had ever been tricked into buying one of those magic vases. But that didn't seem to be the case. Sojiro still maintained that, in his opinion, fortune-telling wasn't entirely bad. He thought it was good if someone felt happy receiving a positive prediction. However, the girl countered by asking, "What if the prediction is bad?" Her words helped Sojiro piece the events together, and he began to realize that the girl wasn't actually sick. She was just heartbroken. Sojiro's deductive abilities sent shivers down her spine, to the point where she wondered if he was a stalker or something. However, after that moment, she began to tell her story. It turned out she used to have a crush on a boy. He was a bit rough around the edges, but very kind. The two of them always treated each other like family, and his mother even asked her to look after her son. She thought she would be going to the same school as him again, but when she started school, she found out that he already had someone else in his life. However, Sojiro didn't seem very focused. His gaze was unfocused, as if he were thinking about something else. However, he eventually introduced himself, and the girl immediately recognized his last name. Not only that, Sojiro unexpectedly suggested that if she needed advice, there was a club on the second floor where she could get helpful guidance. Then, Sojiro returned to the classroom, leaving the handkerchief for the girl. As a result, the girl returned to her class, where she met Rin, and immediately realized that the boy she had just met was Rin's older brother. Furthermore, the girl's name was finally revealed to be Yuta. She was the one who had once received a prophecy from Asuka. Recalling this, Uta decided to go to the fortune-telling club. But this time she wasn't there out of curiosity, only to return the handkerchief. Although she wasn't particularly happy about having to come here, she still went in. There, Uta overheard two people arguing about sumo, specifically about the rule against urinating on opponents and instead pushing them out of the ring. This bizarre scene left Uta quite bewildered. Not only that, she was even more surprised to see Asuka there as well. But that wasn't all. Suddenly, Uta's confusion reached its peak when she heard Sojiro call Asuka-senpai. However, Asuka immediately gestured for her to be quiet. At that moment, Uta recalled how harshly Asuka had predicted her, suggesting she should get plastic surgery if she wanted a chance with the person she liked. Although unhappy, Uta decided to remain silent for the time being. Even though she knew it wasn't entirely Asuka's fault, she still wanted a little revenge. So, despite her feelings, Uta started acting incredibly adorable. She thanked Sojiro for his advice. She even cleverly suggested continuing to receive advice from Sojiro, then quickly left. As she left, Uta didn't forget to tease Asuka by sticking out her tongue. Asuka was left speechless after witnessing someone dare to take over her territory. However, all Asuka could do was criticize Uta's actions as wrong. Meanwhile, Sojiro was completely bewildered, not understanding what Uta had just done. One day, Sojiro was riding the train home. On the way, he overheard a group of schoolgirls sitting next to him talking about their boyfriends. They said it was strange to let her boyfriend treat her, especially since he didn't have a part-time job. According to them, it made them feel like they were taking money from his parents. Hearing those words, Sojiro felt a little confused and uneasy, as it made him think about his own situation. However, the story didn't end there. The next day, at the club room, Sojiro arrived earlier than usual and was sitting reading a magazine. Suddenly, Asuka walked in, surprised to see Sojiro before her. To her surprise, Sojiro explained that the homeroom class had ended early, so he had some free time. Noticing the magazine in Sojiro's hand, Asuka curiously asked what it was. Sojiro then explained that he was considering getting a part-time job and was looking through job postings. However, Asuka immediately objected vehemently. She declared that no one in her club was allowed to work overtime. Hearing this, Sojiro was confused because he had never been informed of this rule before. He only knew 3 main rules in the club: pamper, obey, and listen to Asuka, but this rule prohibiting part-time work was quite strange. Asuka then asked Sojiro if he wanted to buy something so expensive that he needed to work extra hours, and she insisted that she could buy almost anything he needed. However, Sojiro frankly replied that it wasn't because he wanted to buy things. He even reminded Asuka that she should manage her finances better, instead of spending money so lavishly. Hearing Sojiro say that she should manage her money better since living alone, Asuka only responded with a blank stare, declaring that money wasn't an issue for her. If she wanted, she could have as much money as she pleased. It seems that when Asuka is truly serious, the future becomes the present, and the present becomes the past, thanks to her extraordinary fortune-telling abilities. However, she also admitted that not everything is easy to achieve, especially Sojiro. Nevertheless, Sojiro remained steadfast in his belief, asserting that he wanted to earn what he needed through his own efforts. Asuka agreed with this sentiment. She revealed that most of what she had just said was just a joke. But, as always, Asuka quickly came up with a genius idea. She offered Sojiro a job helping with housework, and she would pay him whatever he asked for. However, Sojiro was only worried about what Asuka would do if he agreed. Nevertheless, he explained the real reason why he wanted to get a part-time job, revealing that he wanted to save up and prepare for the upcoming summer so they could both go out and have fun together. As a man, Sojiro wanted to pay Asuka's share of the expenses himself. Hearing these words, Asuka suddenly blushed and became flustered. This made her extremely happy, and she said that besides Tsukimi, no one had ever done anything like that for her. In response, Sojiro affirmed that she could expect much more from him in the future. Finally, Asuka agreed to let him work, although she felt a little sad because it meant he wouldn't have much time for club activities. However, Sojiro explained that he only works on weekends, so he can still balance everything. But this means he doesn't have any days off. Asuka once again offered Sojiro a job. She insisted that he didn't need to do anything unusual, simply have a meal with her, and she would pay him 30,000 yen. However, this offer only made Sojiro feel untrustworthy, causing him to become pensive. His sadness, in turn, awakened Asuka's mischievous nature, and then, as if from nowhere, Asuka suddenly grabbed Sojiro's head with her legs and squeezed tightly. She teased him, telling him there was no need to be so discouraged, that she would transform him into a real man. This bold action immediately led Sojiro to conclude that she intended to force him to do something inappropriate. In response, he remarked that Asuka had absolutely no concept of propriety. Hearing this, she angrily kicked him. She declared, "I'm not that kind of person. I wouldn't do these things to anyone else." However, the kick was so powerful that Sojiro lost his balance, suffered a head injury, and left this world, temporarily going to heaven in an unconscious state. In another corner of the story, Rin is hanging out with her close friends at a karaoke bar. There, Mo is trying to sort the drinks because Nagi, one of the group, accidentally mixed them all together. Mo seems to have an intolerance for carbonated drinks, prompting Nagi to curiously ask if Mo is a superpower. Mo jokingly replies that she's an esper, someone with supernatural abilities. This answer led the group to start discussing espers and recent TV stories. They mentioned a young esper around their age, who had recently appeared on a television show and caused a stir. Although no one could remember the name of the esper they were talking about, the conversation was interrupted when Uta chimed in, wondering why she was the only one singing. However, the group quickly dodged the question and began talking about their aspirations for happiness in life. Elsewhere, Asuka and Sojiro are working on a plan to help Asuka make friends. The first part of the plan is to create a social media account for her. Sojiro asserted that if Asuka knew how to use it, she could achieve some success. However, he soon realized that Asuka wasn't very serious. She named her account Tanaka. While the name itself wasn't wrong, it clearly didn't suit the kind of prominence they were aiming for. The next step was filling out the bio. Sojiro asked if Asuka had any notable talents or strengths to highlight. Of course, Asuka asserted that she had Hermione milkers, a euphemism for her large breasts. But that obviously can't be written in the bio. With an expressionless face, Sojiro suggested they should include fortune-telling in her talent section. He insisted on persuading her to agree, leaving Asuka with no choice but to accept. However, Asuka inadvertently wrote in her bio that she could perform breast fortune-telling, something nobody understood the real meaning of. After that, they seriously revised their bios and then moved on to choosing a profile picture. Asuka confidently stated that she already had the perfect picture in mind. Sojiro quickly reminded her that the profile picture shouldn't be related to her treasure. Although Asuka denied having that intention, her body language betrayed the truth. Despite Sojiro's repeated reminders not to use APEI, a euphemism for breasts, Asuka insisted that she had no intention of doing so. But then she showed him the photo. It was a picture of Asuka in casual clothes, with the highlight being her irresistible curves. Seeing the photograph, Sojiro was so stunned he couldn't utter a word. The only thing he could say was his honest thought, that he wanted this photograph. Nevertheless, like a true good guy, Sojiro refused the opportunity to own the picture. Asuka, with a mischievous smile, teased him that such restraint wasn't good for his health. Finally, she decided to temporarily set Sojiro's picture as her profile picture, completing her own profile. However, the end result was a profile that looked no different from a spam account. Ignoring that, they moved on to the next step, posting their first social media post. Asuka commented that they were becoming increasingly disorganized with each step. Back at the karaoke bar, Uta was scrolling through her phone when she accidentally discovered a newly created account. Seeing this, she asked Rin if the account belonged to her brother. But before Rin could answer, Nagi and Mo surrounded her, curiously asking for details about her brother. Rin explained that he was a second-year student at the school, meaning he was their senpai, senior. Meanwhile, Uta began checking the account, noticing it had only one follower, and that follower was Sojiro. Furthermore, the only post on the account was about accurate fortune-telling. Seeing this, she didn't hesitate to immediately block the account. At the same time, Asuka found herself blocked and panicked. She hurriedly explained the situation to Sojiro. She suggested that perhaps the person had simply blocked everyone named Tanaka. Hearing that, Asuka thought that perhaps she should change her name. At the karaoke bar, Mo finally remembered the name of the Esper guy they were talking about. They were talking about Namazu. However, upon hearing his name, Uta covered his ears and began making loud noises to avoid hearing anything related to fortune-telling. Seeing Uta's distress, the girls tried to comfort her, but it was too late. Uta began to sob uncontrollably, recalling her recent painful experiences. But the girls comforted her, giving her a microphone so she could sing and chase away her sadness. Meanwhile, Asuka changed her online name to Namazu, revealing that he was actually the Esper boy. One day after school, Sojiro was walking to the club room, humming to himself. However, as he got closer, he heard someone's voice. He checked and discovered a cute little creature named Asuka-senpai, trying to reach for something high up. So he approached her, and she explained that she wanted to reach the windows high up. Hearing this, Sojiro remarked on how small Asuka really was, but she countered, claiming he must have meant something else. However, they weren't actually talking about the same thing. When she mentioned her cup size, he was referring to her body length. Suddenly, a button on Asuka's shirt popped off and flew straight into Sojiro's face. This only further proved Asuka's point that she was indeed quite large, despite everything. Seeing her breasts exposed, Sojiro began to undress, surprising Asuka. Not only that, he also gave her his shirt. He told her to take it off, and Asuka, with her excessive eagerness, started undressing right there, obviously. However, Sojiro stopped her midway and told her to go into the club room and put her shirt back on while he adjusted her button. He even closed the window high up, making her exclaim with joy at his action. All of this made Sojiro realize that Asuka was actually still very childish. Nevertheless, he continued with his work. From his bag, he took out his sewing kit, complete with all the thread needed to finish the job. And so he set to work. Before long, he had finished. When her work was finished, Asuka walked out of the club room. She wore his oversized shirt, revealing her curves. Seeing her in this state, Sojiro turned away and told her to button up her shirt. However, seeing his reaction, Asuka decided to tease him and approached, asking if her shirt was finished yet. She was surprised to find it already fixed. Sojiro's speed impressed her, and she asked if this was his specialty. But Sojiro explained that such a small job was nothing to worry about. However, when he saw that her shirt had been repaired, he wanted his own shirt back. However, Asuka pretended not to understand, and declared that she didn't want to return it. Despite Sojiro's pleading, saying he couldn't go home without the jacket, Asuka still insists that the shirt is hers, even though it's clearly not. She even declared that if Sojiro wanted his coat back, he would have to take it from her by force. Something Sojiro would very much like to do if he could. But of course, Asuka wasn't happy with that and continued to tease him playfully. Sojiro gave up, no longer trying to get the jacket back. He let Asuka take the jacket home, saying he would use it when he returned it. But she still insisted that the shirt was hers. She even suggested that if Sojiro really wanted a shirt, he could wear hers instead of his own. Although that wasn't the point, she still insisted Sojiro wear it. As a result, Sojiro found the shirt extremely tight, and the fabric immediately stretched taut. What's more, in the blink of an eye, all the buttons popped off. Seeing this, Asuka burst into laughter and declared that Sojiro certainly couldn't wear that shirt home. All these taunts had reduced Sojiro to a shadow of his former self, and in his despair, he knelt down. Asuka approached Sojiro and sat down, declaring that he would never win against her. A few days later, at lunchtime, Sojiro realized he had accidentally brought Rin's lunchbox. However, what surprised Ubayashi was how incredibly large the lunchbox was. Nevertheless, as a good older brother, Sojiro explained that they were both in a hurry to get to school today, so they probably mixed up the lunchboxes. He got up to go exchange his lunchbox, leaving Ubayashi to ponder how Rin's lunchbox was 4 times bigger than his. Meanwhile, Rin was having lunch with her female classmates when Uta told her that her brother had come to the classroom door to see her. Seeing her camp leader there, Rin felt embarrassed and asked why he was there, but Sojiro continued to joke around. He gave her his lunchbox, telling her to return his. However, Rin wondered why she had her brother's lunchbox, leading Sojiro to think she had probably eaten it all. Even so, Rin still had plenty of room to eat the entire giant lunchbox. This left Sojiro wondering what he would eat. However, that wasn't Rin's concern. They argued, while Mo and Yuta secretly listened to their conversation. Mo commented on how tall Sojiro was, even though she couldn't see his face clearly. Then Uta suddenly stood up and walked towards the 2 brothers. Then she gave her lunchbox to Sojiro. Hearing this, Rin asked if she knew her brother. Uta confirmed this, even though they hadn't actually been introduced to each other. However, Yuta explained that they had a home economics class during the fourth period, so she wasn't actually feeling hungry. So what about green stomach? Nevertheless, Uta gave his lunchbox to Sojiro and said it was a handkerchief for his hands. Hearing this, Sojiro finally decided to accept it. Meanwhile, Rin observed the relationship between the two and came up with an interesting idea. On the other hand, Sojiro had a creative idea. He suggested they share lunchboxes in the clubroom. He said Asuka would be there too, and it would be a good opportunity to chat. Clearly, Uta tried to refuse, but Rin intervened, insisting that she go with Sojiro, and so they both left to go to the fortune-telling club. Turning back to Rin, she returned to her seat and thought that if she had an older sister, Rin would prefer her sister to be Uta rather than Asuka. Anyway, the couple arrived at the clubroom and started sharing their lunchboxes. Meanwhile, Asuka sat there, growing increasingly jealous of their relationship. She angrily asked what they were doing, and Sojiro explained that he was sharing a lunchbox with Uta because his younger sister took his lunchbox. Furthermore, he thought they could do some club activities while eating. Uta joined the conversation and stated that she had heard Asuka could predict someone's future spouse. So she asked Asuka if she could do it for her. Asuka agreed, but as soon as he took a bite of the food, Sojiro had to admit that he was impressed with its taste. He asked if Uta had made the dish herself, and she confirmed, saying she had quite a bit of cooking experience. Seeing the atmosphere between them improving, Asuka started to pout, and Asuka refused to read Uta's fate anymore. She even scolded Sojiro for only paying attention to Uta. However, Sojiro explained that it was basic courtesy, as she was their guest. After realizing this, Asuka returned to normal and agreed to read Uta's fortune. However, she was still unhappy with the gap between Sojiro and Uta, and she decided to have them sit far apart. But in the end, Uta refused the offer. Hearing all this, Sojiro began to wonder. He wondered if these two girls would truly get along, considering he'd thought they'd become close instantly. Then, Uta asked Sojiro if he knew who his destined soulmate was. Upon learning that Asuka had decided he would be with her, Uta asked if Sojiro liked younger girls. But Sojiro replied that it wasn't his concern. He already had Rin, so a younger girl would only make him feel like she was her older sister. Hearing these words, Uta began to silently mock Asuka, but she declared that their destinies were absolute. Hearing this, Asuka also became slightly annoyed, but Sojiro intervened just in time and began stroking her head. He told her to calm down. Sojiro even reminded Asuka that he was talking to someone 3 years younger than her. But this was new information for Uta. She explained that Asuka wasn't even pretending to be a third-year student. She was acting like a fourth-year student. He's almost old enough to drink alcohol. Saying that, Uta started laughing at Asuka, but then Sojiro approached her and began stroking Uta's head, telling her that it takes two people to start a fight. However, Sojiro's strange reaction made Uta wonder if he was an eccentric, something even Asuka could agree with. One afternoon, Sojiro walked into the clubroom and found Asuka caressing Mo, who was unconscious. When he walked in, he let out an awkward laugh and asked her what the hell she was doing, but Asuka just feigned innocence, saying that the girl had suddenly approached her. Asuka suddenly started talking to Mo, then she collapsed to the ground. As a result, she was now stripping the innocent girl. However, Sojiro completely misunderstood what his senpai was talking about. What connection did the girl fainting have to being stripped? Nevertheless, ignoring her worries, Asuka began rambling on about how she had taken an interest in girls' underwear and pulled out Mo's bra. Of course, being the only man there, Sojiro immediately asked Asuka to put her bra away. However, Asuka wasn't one to easily comply. For some reason, she placed the bra on his head, and Sojiro began to understand that something bad was about to happen to him. He panicked because he had a bra on his head, but Asuka explained that even though Mo was quite large, it was nothing to her. Then Asuka had another great idea. She took a pair of underwear and placed it on Sojiro's head as well, making him look like a complete pervert. Of course, Sojiro wasn't happy about this situation either. He worriedly wondered if the unconscious girl had become completely defenseless, both physically and emotionally. But Asuka simply left, announcing that she would go find their club advisor, leaving Sojiro and the unconscious girl behind. Seeing the poor girl stripped naked, Sojiro felt pity and quickly put his jacket over her to cover her up. Suddenly, Mo opened her eyes and sat up. When she saw a strange man sitting in front of her, she didn't know who he was and asked his name. Meanwhile, Sojiro couldn't take his eyes off Mo's bare breasts. He decided to cover her eyes, but accidentally placed her bra in the wrong position. This made Mo see this strange choice as a blindfold. She felt confused, but after observing more closely, she began to feel fear and disgust. She asked Sojiro if he was a pervert. She even questioned what he had done to her while she was asleep. However, Sojiro denied all accusations, explaining that everything had a reason behind it. But then Mo noticed Sojiro realizing there was a pair of underwear on his head. This made Mo extremely embarrassed. She immediately covered her body with her hands out of shyness. Immediately afterwards, Sojiro heard the club doors open. Asuka enters and announces that Tsukimi is absent. However, Asuka feigns ignorance of the situation and denounces Sojiro as a pervert, leaving him wondering why even Asuka would abandon him. Mo is surprised to see Asuka there, but Asuka asked her to keep her true identity a secret. Gradually, the misunderstanding was resolved, and Mo asked for her underwear back. Sojiro gladly complied, but when Mo mentioned the underwear, she revealed that she was wearing her own. This made Sojiro realize that the underwear belonged to Asuka. However, Asuka didn't give Sojiro a definitive answer, but she just told him to find out for himself. Of course, the whole thing left Sojiro very confused, not knowing what was going on. But perhaps the biggest victim in this situation was Mo. One day after school, Sojiro was on his way home with Asuka. As they reached the school gate, he carelessly dropped something, and a pile of fireworks spilled out. Seeing this, Asuka immediately asked him where he got these things from. Sojiro explained that Ubayashi had given it to him. However, this worried Asuka, who thought that Ubayashi always gave out things that children would like. Even so, Sojiro asked her if she liked fireworks, and she replied that she hated them. However, he insisted that since they already had fireworks, they should at least try setting them off once. Asuka said that the nearby riverbank wasn't a suitable place to do this. However, Sojiro had a brilliant idea in his head. Why don't they try setting off fireworks at your house? This suggestion left Asuka speechless. Anyway, they finally arrived at Sakagami's house. When Sojiro entered the house, he told Asuka to wait a moment at the front door. Inside, Rin greeted him and reminded him to be careful because Uta was there. Then he went into the bathroom to change his clothes. However, despite Rin's warning, he unexpectedly encountered Uta as she emerged from the bathroom. Sojiro was surprised by the situation, finding it hard to believe that this could actually happen in real life. He quickly closed the door as if trying to erase the image from his mind. While Asuka remained seated outside, Rin scolds Sojiro for entering the room while Uta was there, causing her great embarrassment. However, Uta tries to defend Sojiro, explaining that he didn't know she was there. Sojiro felt deeply guilty. He bowed his head and apologized to Uta for his actions, admitting that there was no justification for his behavior. As an apology, he invited both Rin and Uta to the fireworks display to make amends. There, Asuka felt confused, not understanding why Uta was there. Rin explained that something had happened and she had lent Uta her staff. Then, Rin asked Asuka why she was there. However, Asuka, with her mischievous and unyielding personality, simply stated that this was her home, although Rin immediately denied it. As they sat on the porch, they began to chat, with Rin asking Asuka if she liked her older brother. Asuka wasn't sure. She didn't really care how other people defined emotions. Hearing that, Rin felt slightly uncomfortable with Asuka's perspective. However, Asuka went on to say that sometimes when she looked at Sojiro, she felt excited, or something like that. Of course, Rin got angry about this and declared it was just lust. But Asuka insisted it was a more innocent feeling. The argument between the two became heated, and hearing this, Sojiro came over carrying some firecrackers and gave Asuka some. Seeing this, Asuka asked if they weren't planning on setting off fireworks at night, but Sojiro refused, saying it would be dangerous for her to go home alone at night. However, Asuka didn't think she would be home tonight, which worried Sojiro and angered Rin even more. Rin then demanded that Asuka return immediately. She also revealed that Uta would be staying overnight. Of course, Uta didn't know this either. However, Sakagami's mother had given Rin permission to do so, and so Asuka also asked for her permission, which she agreed to, saying that everyone was welcome. These extra plans came as a surprise to Sojiro, but he couldn't refuse any of Rin's friends a visit. In his mind, everything would be fine as long as he was careful not to let them see him exposed and let them into his room. However, all these preparations immediately became meaningless. Asuka enters Sojiro's room and begins searching through adult magazines. Meanwhile, Uta comments that Sojiro's room smells like Kim, while Rin insists it smells exactly like her brother. So she took Uta to her room, which made Sojiro very sad. Seeking reassurance, he turned to ask Asuka if she thought his room smelled bad. However, he discovered that Asuka had fallen asleep on his bed. As he approached to check, he was shocked to discover that she was naked. So Sojiro failed in both missions, avoiding seeing the girls exposed and keeping them out of his room. Afterward, the whole group had dinner together. It was clear that Rin had helped prepare the meal, but she said that was the little she could do since they had let her stay. Furthermore, to tease Asuka, she even said that she couldn't sleep while the hostess was preparing the meal. Sojiro's mother also joined the conversation, complimenting Uta on the delicious food she cooked. Uta felt embarrassed by the compliment. Seeing this, Asuka unexpectedly stood up, declaring that she would help clean up and join Sojiro in the kitchen. They washed the dishes together while Sojiro's mother watched them. Finally, it was dark enough for them to begin the fireworks display. As they went out onto the porch, Sojiro recalled Asuka saying she hated fireworks. But despite that, she had decided to attend. Suddenly, Sojiro's mother called Asuka inside, and she asked the girl for a moment to talk. Meanwhile, Rin suggested they light a large firework, the kind that explodes in the sky and leaves trails of stars. However, Sojiro refused, saying that kind of firework shouldn't be used in an urban area. At the same time, Uta handed him a bucket of water, which greatly impressed Sojiro with her thoughtfulness. Sojiro asks Uta if she's an only child, but she explains that she is, but once had an older brother who was taken away by another woman. This put her in a bad mood. Sojiro called Rin to comfort her. Meanwhile, he wondered what Asuka and his mother were talking about. Thinking about this, he remembered that Asuka's family didn't live with her. He suddenly realized that he knew nothing about Asuka. Even so, when he tried to ask her, Asuka just evaded his questions and refused to answer them. Despite this, Rin persevered and, together with Uta, began lighting the fireworks. Meanwhile, Sojiro sat beside her, looking up at the sky and waiting for Asuka to return. When she returned and sat down beside him, they had a short conversation. Asuka praised Sojiro's family and spoke of their kindness. In response, Sojiro asks about her parents, and Asuka recounts that they were terrible people who abandoned her and went somewhere, leaving her with only enough money to live on. For this reason, she has never been close to anyone in her life, not even her family, and that's why she hates fireworks, because she can't enjoy them alone. However, Sojiro continued, saying that she now had a convenient classmate, and she was no longer alone. This made her heart race, but that wasn't all. Sojiro went on to say that now she was no longer alone, they should celebrate the occasion by setting off a big firework. Then he helped Asuka stand up, and they lit the firecracker, creating a big explosion. Rin remarked that the firework was smaller than she expected, while Sojiro was surprised by how loud the explosion actually was. And he wasn't the only one who thought so. Sojiro's mother angrily came out, scolding him and telling him to apologize and explain to the neighbors. Meanwhile, Asuka remained standing, looking up at the sky, her expression blank as she witnessed this. Uta told her to turn back, noticing that Asuka was captivated by the fireworks and perhaps also by Sojiro's earlier words. As the night continued, Asuka recalled memories from the past. One night, she sat with her beloved grandmother and they watched fireworks together. At that time, Asuka was still young, and she remarked that she preferred watching videos to fireworks displays, thinking she could watch them anytime on her phone. Hearing this, Asuka's grandmother was surprised and called her little girl, but still loved her. However, her grandmother then told Asuka to listen carefully. She revealed that with things like fireworks, it's not about what you do, but who you do it with. As people grow older, these kinds of memories are what keep them alive. Of course, the naive young Asuka didn't really understand what her grandmother was saying. However, that's something she'll understand over time. Years later, when Asuka was in high school, she recalled watching a fireworks display from her apartment window. Although not particularly interested, she quickly pulled the curtain shut. Back in the present, Rin was confused when she heard Asuka say that she had stolen Rin's pajamas and wanted to sleep in her room. Of course, Asuka's first choice was Sojiro's room, but he refused. Hearing this, Rin became angry and told Asuka to sleep in the hallway. At the same time, Uta, who was also present, asked if she should sleep in the hallway too. But like a good friend, Rin said that Uta could just share a bed with her. Of course, Asuka also wanted to sleep on the bed and didn't hesitate to state that clearly. Rin was only concerned with getting her pajamas back from Asuka. While Rin tried to force Asuka to return them, Uta watched them argue and struggle. Noticing Uta's intense gaze, Rin asked what was wrong. Uta replied that she was just thinking about how much she hated women, or rather, some women. Asuka realized Uta's intentions and became defiant, saying that if Uta wanted, she was ready to face her in a fight. Asuka began warming up by throwing a few punches, and Rin, surprised, asked why on earth Asuka had a habit of wearing other people's clothes without any body covering. Asuka was following her mother's wishes, letting things develop naturally. Noticing that Rin was restraining Asuka, Uta decided to take advantage of the situation. She instructed Rin to continue holding Asuka back, declaring that victory would be decided by the first blow. To inflict maximum damage, Uta even wielded a pen. Before long, the two began to fight lightly, creating a commotion. Finally, Sojiro had to go into Rin's room to ask them to be quiet. But this only angered Rin more, as she wasn't the one causing the commotion. After Sojiro's warning, the battle stopped, and Uta apologized to Rin. However, the story doesn't end there. Asuka asks Uta how she feels about Sojiro. Hearing this question, Uta becomes defiant again, asking why she should answer such a question. However, this topic piqued Rin's curiosity. After drinking some fruit juice, she actually started to open up, and she told everyone about how she used to really like Ryu, her childhood friend, until he suddenly got a girlfriend without telling her. However, Asuka didn't care about this story, saying that if Uta wanted to change her fate, she should have listened to her advice, because changing one's destiny requires determination. However, Rin still really wanted to know what Uta thought of her brother. Finally, after some persuasion, Uta revealed that she didn't feel anything special about Sojiro. But Rin didn't let the story end there. Instead, she asked Uta how she felt when Sojiro accidentally saw her naked. Upon hearing this, Asuka was completely speechless and called Uta a flirtatious girl, revealing that she herself had only engaged in PG-13 content and had never crossed the R-rated line. Meanwhile, Uta blushed profusely, insisting that Sojiro didn't seem to think much of it, so she didn't want to make a big deal out of it. However, Asuka was displeased with Uta's attitude and grabbed her face. At the same time, Rin asked why Asuka cared so much, especially since she didn't even like Sojiro. According to Asuka herself, she only felt attracted to him, but ever since that conversation, things have changed. Suddenly, Asuka's face also turned red and she fell silent. Seeing this, Uta began to tease Asuka. Uta asks if she should claim Sojiro for herself. This led to the two of them wrestling with each other all night, while Rin decided to go to sleep and ignore them. The next morning, Sojiro woke up earlier than everyone else and prepared breakfast. Then he went to wake the girls up, and he saw they were all sleeping together on the floor. Anyway, the overnight stay finally came to an end, and everyone went home. A few days later, Asuka was seen in the club room, tidying up a few things, when she suddenly remembered Sojiro's face and words from the night of the fireworks. As she recalled the incident, her face flushed, but at that moment, Sojiro suddenly appeared from behind, asking if she needed help. Sojiro's sudden appearance startled Asuka. She stepped back and dropped a glass jar, causing it to shatter. Although Sojiro managed to restrain Asuka before she was injured, the vase shattered on the floor. He asked her how she could have dropped the object, given her gorilla grip strength. However, Asuka was now confused by Sojiro's closeness and asked him to let go of her. Hearing this, Sojiro went to get his cleaning supplies, asking Asuka what she was doing while he worked. She explained that the club teacher, Tsukimi, had brought some things over and told her to put them in the secret locker. However, the jar was broken, and what was inside? A fluffy ball was lying on the floor. Seeing this, Asuka picked it up and declared that it was Kasaran Pasaran, a type of yokai from Japanese mythology. Sojiro was clearly skeptical at first, but suddenly he did a 180-degree turn and started treating Asuka like a child. Seeing this, Asuka immediately scolded him, asking if she looked like a child who would easily believe such nonsense. However, she insisted that it was indeed a Kasaran Pasaran, and if Sojiro didn't believe her, she suggested he try touching it. When Sojiro did so, he found that it was surprisingly warm, a characteristic of this type of yokai. After realizing this, both of them panicked a little and came to the conclusion that this thing could be none other than Kasaran Pasaran. As a result, they placed it on the table and Sojiro began to wonder what this fluffy ball of fluff ate to survive. So, Asuka searched on her phone and discovered that Kasaran Pasaran eats makeup powder. Apparently, Sojiro didn't have that readily available, so he gave it a small wooden stick to see how it would react. Meanwhile, Asuka began secretly glancing at Sojiro, her face flushing bright red. It wasn't until Sojiro turned to look at her that she became even more flustered. Noticing that Asuka wasn't acting like herself, Sojiro tried to restore the normal atmosphere. He commented that he hoped something good would happen because according to legend, finding Kasaran Pasaran would bring happiness to the finder. Hearing this, Asuka puffed out her chest proudly, declaring that she could bring happiness. Of course, this reaction struck Sojiro as somewhat odd, and he remarked that she was behaving very strangely. Asuka, realizing she was acting unusually, began to think she might be growing an extra heart or something. But despite feeling around in her underwear, she couldn't find any concrete evidence. Therefore, Asuka asked Sojiro to check her breasts for anything unusual. Initially, he agreed unconsciously, but quickly realized his mistake and flatly refused. However, Asuka noticed that Kasaran Pasaran had eaten all the wooden sticks they had given it. Their joy was short-lived when their advisor, Tsukimi, unexpectedly appeared from behind. Seeing her arrive, Asuka immediately declared that she would take responsibility for Kasaran Pasaran, and she insisted that she would keep it in the club room. However, the advisor adamantly denied that the badminton shuttlecock was a yokai, despite Sojiro's attempts to explain that the strange object had eaten the wooden stick. Tsukimi's suspicious expression was enough to make him stop. Furthermore, she revealed that if this really was Pasaran, then ordinary people should stay away from it. Asuka seemed upset that her badminton shuttlecock was taken away, and Tsukimi advised her to play with Sojiro's hair or something similar. Hearing that, she immediately started messing up Sojiro's hair. Suddenly, while Asuka was working, Tsukimi called Sojiro and asked if he had fed the badminton shuttlecock anything. This question made both of them blush profusely. To hide her embarrassment, Asuka unexpectedly asked Sojiro how many hearts she had, although in reality Sojiro paid no attention to anything other than the distinct sensation of softness emanating from the event. One day, Sojiro was buried in the sand, while Asuka was excitedly building a sand column around him. While he was stuck, his eyes inadvertently glanced at Asuka's back as she burst into mischievous laughter. This reminded Sojiro of how he had fallen into this strange situation. Early that morning, Asuka arrived at Sakagami's house, and while Sojiro was still fast asleep, she sneaked into his bed. When Sojiro suddenly woke up, the first thing he saw was Asuka lying beside him with an incredibly cute expression on her face. Asuka told Sojiro that she wanted to go to the beach because it was her day off. However, Sojiro, half asleep, simply pulled the blanket up and continued to sleep, leaving Asuka feeling ignored. However, when Sojiro finally woke up, he was shocked and confused to find Asuka still lying in his bed. He apologized for ignoring her, explaining that he had only been half asleep. However, Asuka, embarrassed, quickly said that she just wanted to go to the beach. Seeing Asuka's reaction, Sojiro immediately declared that he loved the beach and that they should go right away. Just then, Rin walked into the room, excitedly agreeing to the idea. She was ready to go. Furthermore, Rin decided to invite Uta along since Mo and Nagi were both busy today. Despite Asuka's attempts to dissuade her, Rin remained adamant. Meanwhile, Sojiro began searching for his swimsuit and unexpectedly discovered a small Ziploc bag. He looked at the bag in his hand, which contained something he couldn't recall ever owning. The thought that it might all be just a hallucination flashed through his mind, leaving Sojiro feeling somewhat disoriented. However, this was quickly forgotten when their group arrived at the expansive beach. Asuka was stunned when she saw the true size of the beach. She began measuring the length of the sand column she had erected against her body, telling herself that anything larger than that would definitely not fit. Sojiro's face flushed at Asuka's suggestive actions, and he quickly told her to stop. Suddenly, Uta appeared from behind and lightly tapped Asuka on the head, scolding her for her improper behavior. This immediately sparked an argument between the two girls. Despite being buried under the sand, Sojiro tried to calm the situation, but his efforts were not immediately successful. Meanwhile, Sojiro asked Uta where Rin was. Uta explained that Rin was currently participating in an eating contest for a large prize. A short while later, Rin returned with a triumphant expression, holding her prize, while Asuka stared at her in astonishment, wondering how Rin could fit such a huge amount of food into her small stomach. As soon as Rin returned, she quickly pulled her brother away from the argument, freeing Sojiro from being caught between the two girls. This left Uta and Asuka alone, and unsurprisingly, they immediately started bickering with each other. Meanwhile, Sojiro felt anxious about leaving Uta and Asuka together, but Rin reassured him that their relationship had improved. She even recalled seeing them chatting normally at school on their first day. However, what surprised Sojiro the most was Rin's unintentional revelation that Asuka and Uta were in the same class. He, who had always thought Asuka was his senpai, was shocked by this fact. Rin quickly realized her mistake of letting the cat out of the bag, and tried to make amends by switching to cute little sister mode. Rin began to distract Sojiro, doing everything she could to make him forget what he had just heard. Meanwhile, back at Asuka and Uta, both were breathless with exhaustion after their argument. Unexpectedly, two strangers appeared, trying to approach and flirt with Uta and Asuka. However, Asuka didn't hesitate and immediately cursed at both of them, causing them to leave in tears. When they were out of sight, Asuka turned to Uta and taunted her, asking if she, who liked being approached, would accept anyone after being rejected. Uta responded quietly, saying it didn't matter because the man she loved was out of her reach. Hearing that desperate reply, Asuka warned Uta to be careful, or she could easily fall into the hands of a worthless person. However, Uta emphasized that Asuka was in a much better position, as her destined partner was Sojiro, but Asuka quickly refuted this, explaining that Sojiro's partner would probably be someone more like Uta. Asuka recounted that from their very first meeting, Uta had been the one to take the initiative in their interactions with Sojiro. Furthermore, relationships that begin unexpectedly, like Uta's with him, usually have a deeper meaning. This surprised Uta, and she asked if that was true, then why was Asuka trying so hard? Asuka took a deep breath, then declared emphatically, "Because I love him." In such circumstances, she didn't give up just because of things like fate. This made Uta empathize with Asuka, and they became closer and closer. So she wanted to try searching for Asuka's breasts, and they started doing just that. However, while they were in the act, Sojiro returned with Rin. It seemed Rin had transformed into a kawa, and he set her down. Before staring intensely at Asuka, despite trying to appear normal, Sojiro suggested they all play a little longer since they were already at the beach. But just as he finished speaking, a sudden heavy downpour began, leaving the entire group stranded on the beach due to the intense rain. Uta looked up and discovered that all the trains had stopped as well, so they were now stranded. As the group sat around wondering what to do, the owner of the restaurant where they were staying told them to leave because it was about to close. To buy time, Rin tried to order squid, but the owner refused to serve it. saying that Rin's taste buds wouldn't be affected by an ordinary squid. Therefore, Sojiro concluded that they couldn't leave. And since the trains had also stopped, their only option was to sit still and wait for death. Hearing this, the restaurant owner came up with an idea and offered to take the group to a nearby inn owned by his friend. However, there was another problem. They had no money. At least that was the case until Rin's appetite kicked in. She had just won a large sum of money in an eating contest, money the owner had saved up for his living expenses this month, and so the group was taken to an inn. When they arrived, Sojiro asked if they were allowed to stay overnight at the inn, even though they were high school students. However, while he was still pondering this, a rather frightening old man came to greet them. It turned out the inn was closed that day, but the old man said he couldn't sit idly by, fiddling with his fingers while people needed help. As a result, he rented the group a room to stay in, and they were very grateful, even though it was just one room. However, when they got to the room, Rin saw an outdoor bathtub and wanted to jump in immediately, which, of course, was raining, and this would only get her soaking wet, as Sojiro pointed out. So she decided to take a normal bath and brought Uta and Asuka along. Meanwhile, Sojiro stayed behind and pondered Rin's strange behavior at the beach. Meanwhile, in the bathroom, Rin apologized to Asuka, saying that she might have accidentally revealed her true age. But even so, Asuka didn't seem angry or anything. Actually, for her, it was just a matter of time. To comfort Rin, Asuka said that she didn't think Rin's brother would be interested in older girls. He even brought a girl home, who was in the same class as him, which worried Asuka. However, Rin insisted that Asuka still had a chance, then got up and left the bathroom. Uta and Asuka followed suit, and they all started heading outside. As Rin stepped out, she unexpectedly encountered Sojiro, who was standing in front of her completely naked. It turned out he also wanted to take a bath, but before he could leave or explain, Asuka and Uta also came out of the bathroom, arguing, and coincidentally encountered Sojiro with his Excalibur sword. Seeing such a huge sword, both of them were astonished and let out a loud scream. Then they all returned to the room where Sojiro, confused and embarrassed, seemed to have forgotten that he was the only man there. On the other hand, the girls seemed to be behaving normally, which confused Sojiro. However, it turned out that instead of being embarrassed, Uta and Asuka were admiring Sojiro's horse, making him even more flustered. Seeing his reaction, they both started teasing him, or rather asserting that it didn't seem very funny despite their exposure. Uta wondered if they could cheer it up if they showed it something more. Not only that, she also started measuring the sticks attached to her body, just like Asuka had done at the beach earlier. Seeing this, Sojiro felt bewildered and told Rin to do something about her friend. But Rin only mocked him, calling him the giant who ruined Pee-Pee. This put Sojiro in an awkward situation, and to escape it, he came up with a brilliant idea. Fall asleep in the blink of an eye. He ended up in Slumberland, and according to Rin, this was the perfect opportunity. It turns out Sojiro won't wake from his sleep no matter what happens, giving Uta and Asuka the chance they need. However, both refused to cross the line of human morality, and so the night passed. Late at night, Sojiro woke up, at first confused about where he was, but then he remembered he was in an inn. He looked around and saw Asuka still sitting there, gazing at the moon. Asuka seems to have made her decision, and they both shared an awkward moment. Asuka apologized for her actions, saying she shouldn't have deceived Sojiro. Finally, she revealed that she was actually Sojiro's junior. As she said these words, Asuka braced herself for the worst. But contrary to expectations, Sojiro acted normally. Not only that, now that he was a senpai, he tried to ask his junior for a shoulder massage, just like Asuka had done before. As they sat down to chat, Asuka asked him what he thought of her confession. Sojiro asserted that he had had a feeling about it all along. Moreover, he was simply surprised that it took her so long to confess. This made Asuka angry, and she patted him lightly on the head out of embarrassment. Additionally, she revealed that she wasn't planning on telling Sojiro the truth right now. For her, there were steps that needed to be taken in such circumstances, but they had overlooked some of them. Therefore, at least for Asuka, fighting fairly no longer made sense. When things had reached this point, she had only one option left: to win Sojiro's heart and claim him through strength. Suddenly, the room went dark, and Asuka lunged at him, her face like that of a predator. Not only that, she lunged at him and kissed him passionately, causing Sojiro to scream in surprise. This noise was enough to wake Uta. She witnessed the intimate moment between the two and began to blush. She even tried to wake Rin up so that she could also witness the moment her brother lost his virginity. Meanwhile, Asuka finally ended the passionate and intense kiss, while Sojiro, still confused, tried to talk to her. However, Asuka was not in the mood to listen to him. So, Sojiro asked her what Tsukimi would think if they crossed the line. But Asuka revealed that she was just a teacher and wouldn't interfere more than necessary. Hearing this, Sojiro then asked what Asuka's parents would think, causing her to pause for a moment. She replied that she would have to tell him about her parents at some point in the future, and this would be a good opportunity. while Asuka's body was still on top of his. Sojiro was still confused by her actions and asked why she did it. Asuka, on the other hand, declared that she only wanted to be happy, and to achieve that, Then she began to ramble. She wondered what would happen to someone who fell under the spell of a witch. She insisted that only he could make her smile. After saying that, she approached him and suddenly a brilliant light appeared. Because of this light, everything around them began to spin. The next thing Sojiro knew, he found himself in a bright, sunny day. This disoriented him and he wondered where they were. Asuka claims that they are currently in one of her memories. And to test this theory, Sojiro tries to pick up a ball at his feet, but he realizes he can't touch it. From now on, Asuka declares she will show Sojiro her past. Although it brought her sadness, he found it very important. In her memory, 5-year-old Asuka was playing alone in her room. Asuka has now revealed that her fortune-telling abilities allow her to see others' pasts. Ultimately, both were transported into the world of memories. In this world of memories, a young Asuka is sitting on the porch, chatting with her grandmother. Her aunt said that for people like them, life was full of loneliness. Of course, this puzzled Asuka, and she asked her aunt what she meant. She explained that she was talking about people with special bloodlines. And it turns out, Asuka's grandmother was a famous fortune teller when she was young, although she was called a fake and a fraud. Because of this, Asuka's father began to resent her mother. Suddenly, they were transferred to Mizuki's house. There, Asuka's father appeared, his face obscured, and asked young Asuka if she had secretly visited her grandmother. In a fit of rage, he began berating Asuka, demanding that she stop contacting her grandmother. Not only that, he called his mother a fraud, declaring that nothing good awaited those who associated with a rude person who devoted her heart and soul to deceiving others. In response, little Asuka revealed that she also had a talent for fortune-telling. However, this drove the father into a rage. With a malicious expression, he declared that fortune-telling was not real. Extraordinary people don't exist, and the fact that the world doesn't recognize her is proof that she's just a pathetic woman, deceiving herself into thinking she's special, even overlooking her son, Sojiro, who is now recognized by society. Asuka and Sojiro witnessed this scene. Sojiro was surprised by the problems Asuka's father was facing, and Asuka reiterated that her parents were weak people. However, she decided to skip this part of the memory and quickly take them to another scene. Asuka and her aunt were walking back from the shop. As they walked away, the aunt gradually stepped forward in front of Asuka, but in doing so, Asuka suddenly had a vision of Polter. The old woman suddenly fell on top of her. Sojiro realized that Asuka had possessed abilities since childhood, but as a young girl, Asuka was unaware of her specialness. She didn't realize that no one else could see the future like she could, and she didn't know that despite possessing this ability, there were things she couldn't see in her memories. After witnessing her niece's talent, the aunt tried to prepare her for the difficult challenges ahead. Therefore, she advised her to overcome all obstacles with strength and destroy anyone who stood in her way. After hearing this, Asuka, now an adult, began to laugh, remarking that her grandmother was always trying to worry about her. Once again, both of them were transported to the near future. One day, Asuka's father suddenly lost his job, leading to an argument between her parents about what they would do next. Her mother seemed to be a money grubber, often overspending her husband's salary. Seeing the chaos, little Asuka tried to ask what was going on, but she was scolded. However, she understood that her parents were worried about finances. So, like an innocent child, she gave her father a portion of her secret stash of money, a lottery ticket. Of course, her father thought it was nonsense and told her to be quiet, because her parents were having a serious conversation. Asuka went to the TV to check her lottery results, while her parents sat down to discuss what to do next. At this point, her mother suggested they should get a divorce. Hearing this, the father became worried, saying that, like his mother, his wife only wanted something from him. However, her mother retorted that he was the same, that he only wanted a good job and a beautiful wife, and declared that someone with such shallow desires would never be accepted by anyone. Suddenly, little Asuka approached her parents and announced that her lottery ticket had won 1 million yen, which of course they dismissed as absurd. But after looking closely, they realized it was true. After checking the ticket again, the father was astonished and wondered how Asuka knew she would win. However, like a child, Asuka simply asked why her father didn't know beforehand. Meanwhile, the adults Sojiro and Asuka were observing everything from the control room. Having witnessed these events, Asuka remarked that although she could see the future, she still couldn't see into the hearts of others, something she hadn't realized at the time.